Something horrible happened in this place. Something that left a psychic scar. Something British. you're you're listening to the UK's jolliest old podcast, the Pod People. I'm the Stoned Tape, Matisse Van Awesome.
I'm the king of the Vuvuzela, Ben Sheets.
Hi, and I'm Cleveland Mosier, and all rats are dirty customers.
Speak on that, King.
They're dirty customers. I mean, what else needs to be said? The British have some crazy expressions, and that was one from these two series we watched, and I really glommed onto it. There's something about like casually saying all rats are dirty customers that I don't know, it just makes me giggle because like I'm not imagining like the way it's intended to be said. I'm imagining the Americanization of that, and it's like a literal like filthy customer at a store that's a rat, and I don't know, it's just kind of cute to me. I don't need to elaborate beyond that.
Yeah, because in America everything operates on material commercial principles, so the rat is the dirty customer.
And literal principles, because we're all stupid.
I know that's true. So, Cleve, this week was your pick, and you a little bit of an unorthodox one. Did we're doing a 2-for-1 special, a double feature, if you will, of a couple of BBC horror specials from 1972. Thematically very similar. Lots of similar sort of production ethos, and yeah, well, I'll let you intro them, but I will say last week when you were teeing us up for these things, you told several egregious lies.
I did. I'm a liar. I'm a filthy, filthy liar. You might even say I'm a dirty customer.
Yeah. Would you like to set the record straight?
Yes, I would. I don't know what you edited. Did you just edit in all? You just left in all my lies?
I just left it in. I just left in all your lies.
Okay, cool. So I thought that Nigel Neal had written both. He'd only written the Stone Tape. The Dead of Night was written by and directed by Don Taylor. Nigel Neal also did a series of which I've seen a few episodes called Beast. That's quite good. And I think that was the only error, wasn't it? Just
no, you said that they were not Christmas specials, and one of them is.
Well, one of them was. That's right. Yeah, that's also it was the Stone Tape, right? That was the Christmas special.
The Exorcism is set on.
It's set on Christmas.
Right. Oh, it's set on
Christmas.
In
fairness, I think it's okay that you had forgotten that, because I wouldn't describe it as particularly Christmassy. They mentioned that it's on Christmas, but otherwise, it's like there's no hallmarks of what we would recognize as like a Christmas decor, I suppose.
There is, I think, a British trend and tradition, largely started, I would say, by Dickens, of Christmas horror. And I don't think that either of these films stray too far from a lot of the same themes that are found in a Christmas Story as well. Or Christmas Carol, sorry.
Yeah,
there I go lying again.
No tongues to the flagpole in these, unfortunately. I do have to say, I gotta commend you, Cleve. You've picked two of the most obscure things we've covered on this podcast for this episode, and
Not intentionally.
yeah, I gotta commend you for digging deep here, right? Like, you've really fallen down the rabbit hole, and yeah, you're curating and taste making some interesting picks. So I would love to hear what went into the decision to pick these two specifically.
A lot of credit to previous guest Jake on this one. He and I have been really digging into a lot of these. I think part of it was just coming off of working on Creepshow adjacent stuff. We've been really digging into anthology horror, and after exhausting much of Tales from the Crypt and Rod Sterling's Night Gallery and other American series, we've kind of dipped over to the BBC ones and found what I think are some real gems. There were just a couple from those sets that I needed to talk with my boys about. I wanted to share and get some discussion in for hopefully good, possibly bad. Just really dig into, because both of these aired in 1972. The Stone Tape, which we'll be talking about later, is its own deal. It just it aired as a special. But The Exorcism is part of a limited series called The Dead of Night, and of which I've seen all of them, and they're all like of this quality of writing, and I would recommend them all. And you can find them just on fucking YouTube of all places, so it's very easy to get to access.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because it was, a limited series TV show where each episode was kind of its own self-contained thing.
Yep.
But when I found these, they were actually labeled episodes 1, 2, and 7. So it almost makes me wonder if the other episodes were completely lost to time. I know British TV in particular were pretty egregious with taping over stuff and not properly archiving things, but it does play into kind of the hauntology of everything, right?
Yes. So there was a third one I did very much want to add to this. This is, I think, already too much material to talk about in one podcast, so I held off on it, but I will briefly mention one of my favorites of these I've also seen, which is referenced lightly in The Exorcism as well. I'm not 100% if it's intentional or not. I'd have to ask Don Taylor, but there's a series from the 60s, so 10 years before these even, and only one episode survived, and I'm blanking on the name. I need I need to look it up, but there's only the first episode of that survived. And so there are a number of these like British series that are frankly incredibly well written in certain circumstances, and well acted and produced as well, that just disappeared because the BBC had to keep, like using the tapes and carrying things over, and there just wasn't time to preserve so many of these. But we're fortunate that some of these were considered lost media for long periods of time until they just turned up on somebody's TiVo or on an old wedding tape, like which can also account for the quality degradation in these as well, which to me largely enhances the experience. That can kind of come or go, I think, depending on personal taste. But to me, like, yeah, even in like the lower quality on YouTube and the rest, like, it comes out great. I'm not sure if you heard Piglet. Piglet just barked in agreement there. But like, I guess, do we just want to go ahead and just dig into the premise of these, or is there more kind of around the periphery we wanted to talk about?
No, I think that's good. I think we can dig in because we do have two to talk about. We're gonna do the Exorcism first, the Dead of Night episode. That one was about runtime like 50 minutes, I want to
Yep.
say. Your average hour of television. Pretty simple premise. It's set on Christmas. A couple is having a dinner party with another couple, and while they're getting dinner ready and everything, they're sort of talking about philosophy and politics and economics and the nature of the human brain and how it sort of can see what it wants to see, basically very similar to the themes of was that dog shit movie we watched 2 weeks ago, Ghost Stories? And as the night goes on, they all sort of start to experience strange phenomena around the house before they find themselves effectively skinamarinked,
Yeah.
sort of trapped in the house. The doors and windows won't open. There's just a void of night outside and weird things happening inside. Pretty straightforward, very stagey, extremely dialogue heavy.
Dialogue reliant, I would even go as far as to say. Like, it,
Yeah.
so much of the horror is just coming out of the spoken word of the performances. Like, it has little to do with big scares or sudden sights. It's entirely reliant on just these characters, expositing. And for me, that works very well.
I was gonna say, to the degree that I think I would almost like this one better, like just reading it, like as like a short story, to sort of like allow my imagination to fill in some of those gaps where I think the production budget is lacking in some places. Um, I think overall, and I enjoyed both of these pretty well, and I think generally my sort of broad feelings that encompassing both is I think they both are conceptually much more interesting than in execution. I love both of these stories conceptually, but just sort of the cheap BBC kind of television production budget of both of them, I do think leaves me kind of wanting in certain ways. But we can dig into that more as we get into specifics.
Part of what I love about both of these is, but particularly the Stone tapes, is that there has been a lot of media since these have come out. Well, The Exorcism as well, like you mentioned with Skinamarink, that has further explored these concepts since they're airing in the 70s or the early 70s, and it helps like having those referenced as a source of the vision that was intended for these and to kind of help with the imagining of it. But I do agree, like, and I think you are right to point out that these do feel like very much adapted for script, like, or adapted for story, in that they work very well just in terms of audio and would play out just as nicely as radio dramas, which is not uncommon for television of the time. You know, much of TV was like, especially like traditional TV formatting with small sets and casting and the rest was formatted off of radio, which was again formatted off of stage plays and formatted off of books. So the formatting and the production process of these things was largely still structured the same way, and had a strong influence on that for it. But yeah, I think that they make what they can with the trim, you know, that they have. But I do agree. But what I do love most about these two is the conceptual. And I do want to give some credit to like the performances in allowing those concepts and giving us that time and breath to kind of really like wallow in those ideas and give us that time to and negative space to like fill in the gaps ourselves. And I do think that is a big part of it. And you know what it is I love these for the same reason I love stuff like Lamb or Hagazusa, where there's a lot of negative time, where the plot isn't necessarily accelerating forward and there isn't a great deal of action, but there's time to just sort of sit and ponder and think about these things, and we're given that time. It's particularly in the Stone tapes. The Exorcism moves at a pretty good clip, though again it is largely dialogue based. Before we dig too much in the details, I do just want to say personally, like The Exorcism again, it's 40 minutes. I would definitely recommend it. Like before we spoil too much about it, but I think it is kind of hard to talk about without spoiling it too.
Yeah, I would recommend seeing it. It's a breezy watch for the most part. Going back to what we were talking about a little bit with the staginess, I think the big question that I was left with for both is thinking about how the medium of film is used to make this feel different than it would on the page or on the stage, right? And to me, what works so well about The Exorcism is they just have just enough flourish visually and with some very striking images to kind of elevate it beyond just a theatrical version. And that's all I need really for something like this. It seemed to me like they might have shot a good chunk of both of these semi live in terms of like playing out the entire scene with multicam setups and kind of just letting the actors act the entire scene. And that's something that isn't as common anymore, but I'm sure for BBC it was very common around the time.
Well,
Um,
I think way more so than in the American film and TV industry. So much of the sensibilities of like British film and television come from stage plays. Because the industry over there was, and I mean continues to be, so much smaller, and not as well. It's not Hollywood, and that's why so many of like the great, especially older generation, the greatest British actors are all classically trained stage actors. they've all done Shakespeare and shit. And I think that kind of ethos is really clear in specials like these, especially the Exorcism, because I think you're right. Like, it absolutely seems like they shot large chunks of this just like in one go with multicam setup. Like, you can tell the way that it's, and this is honestly something that kind of bothered my aesthetic sensibilities a little bit, but the set is fully lit like a stage set. And so there's not much room for like dynamic and kind of more stylish lighting, I guess. And I think that's because it allows the characters to move as they need around the set and constantly be lit, high depth of field. So there's not a lot of like dynamic aspects to the aesthetic. And a lot of these performances, especially towards the end, like are very theatrical, I guess.
Yeah.
And I think too that like this one feels particularly Dickensian to me, even beyond like the Christmas Carol comparison, because an obvious one, because they're visited effectively by a ghost.
Yep.
But I mean, also like you see so much of like Charles Dickens, like Dickensian kind of politics in this as well. It reminded me a lot of like Hard Times, because I mean, ultimately, like the real evil in this story is not the ghost, but capitalism.
Yeah.
It's kind of, and it's pretty heavy-handed with that stuff. But like, yeah, it really does feel like a story that Dickens would have wrote. In that aspect, I think it's really interesting. Like, I do think that like the writing and the performances really carry this way more so than anything else, because like, geez, the last 15 minutes of this is what really shines. Is what really won me over, I think.
Yeah.
Um
I'm glad.
Well, there's a pretty legendary monologue that we can get into later, but like that monologue
yeah.
is quite long
It's
and
incredible.
incredibly
Like,
effective.
It's like 10 minutes.
and to me, like that's what I love about this era and like that style that we were talking about. And it's cool that we're covering this right after our Ghost Watch episode, which was partially live as well. But yeah, to me, there is something really cool and textural about like the organic delivery of a shared scene done in one take. Where or done as a holistic take, we'll say, right? Like, not, like we don't know if it, like likely there were multiple takes, but as a whole with the multicam, like, yeah, we're cutting, there's less pickup shots and it's largely like focused on just different angles of the same scene playing out in real time. And there are still like some shows that break that exception in modern times. I want to say Succession is one of them, where they were often shooting with multicam, like, for like where they do the entire scene as a full take. But yeah, it is very much less seen today. And here in terms of the flow and of the scene and the performances of the actors, like knowing that so much of the time their responses to each other are occurring like to the same takes that we're seeing. There's very little chopping and specificity. Like, to me, like there's just something a little bit more like realistic about that.
There's something more raw to it for sure.
Yes. Yes.
You know?
And like, yeah, like we might lose on some of like that specificity to a take, but to me it's gained back, and like again how live it feels. I would compare it like musically almost to like a live studio album, like as opposed to like just a full on studio album where
Sure.
like all the multi-track is worked up. It's like they've got the full band in there, they're playing the full take. And we get to experience that. It's not the same as a full concert, like seeing a play at a theater with all of the little bugs. It's sort of somewhere between the two, and you're getting that theater experience, but taped forever, or hopefully, in this case. And I really appreciate that. I really appreciate like that sort of middle ground between the two. But yes, as you touched on, Tease, in terms of themes, this is what I would call socialist horror.
Yeah.
All these classic morality horror shorts that play out. This one, the morality is very specifically socialist, and I want to just show it to everybody for just for those reasons alone. It is very heavy-handed, but I think that also makes it somewhat accessible in terms of like a system of belief I tend to adhere to myself.
Yeah. Well, and frankly, kind of something that at least I personally like forget about in terms of like British history, because I think most of us, myself included, sort of associate so much of like British politics with like Thatcherism, but
Right.
this was before that, right? Like this was before Thatcher and Reagan in the 80s and like started the real like descent into unchecked late stage capitalism where we are now. And it's like in the 60s and 70s there was a like thriving labor movement in the UK,
Right.
and like and labor government too. So like there was a part of me when I was watching this where like when they started talking about that stuff, I'm like geez, this is very out of character for like Great Britain. And it's like, oh no, wait, this is just before Thatcher. So I know it's cool. I was kind of surprised, pleasantly surprised by that. And like, yeah, it's heavy handed. Like it's baby's first Marxism, but like,
Much of like the anti-capitalist model for socialism was built out of like Engels and Marx like visiting Europe and seeing how it was being ravished by capitalism, specifically
yeah,
in 1844, which is the exact period in which this ghost is haunting them in, right? And well, actually, I think the ghost is a little bit before, but
I think they said two. I think they said 200 years
200
prior.
years.
So in
Yeah,
the mid 1700s.
yeah,
So
right.
before the Industrial Revolution, but
Like, so roughly Napoleonic, wars in that case. The important thing to note is that for the majority of human history, the working class has eaten shit. And the very interesting time about the period in history in which the Exorcism was shot is post-war Britain, where for one of the first times in history, the wealth class, and this is the case for America as well, was being heavily taxed to help rebuild society, essentially. And through that, society flourished for a long period of time. And we're now seeing in our lifetimes the decay and end of that, right? Where like, inequality grows, like between the working class and the wealth class. But during this time, we're at the height of it, and we're sort of seeing a sense of guilt. And like so much of this piece is about like the guilt surrounding that, where like like 200 years ago we were all starving and dying, and now we're buying up houses, and like that generation is of working class people is able to afford homes and having them done up, and all these other luxuries that were very new, and really again exemplary in history. And we tend to
right.
forget that like that was a weird thing that happened in history where the middle class had money. And so it's been really cool, but for me in particular, I things just sort of worked out this way where within the same 2 weeks of watching this, I've also been conveniently listening to the audiobook, as we were talking about like formatting earlier. I've been listening to the audiobook of The Condition of the Working Class of England in 1844 by Ingalls. And which is also, incredibly socialist, and like I was mentioning a second ago, like sort of the seed bed for the knee jerk of socialism to capitalism. And there is a scene in that book that is literally described in the monologue, nearly word for word. And so it's quite cool to see like in what way this sort of little episode was informed.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we're, in the interest of keeping things moving, like let's just go ahead and get into that. Like sort of broadly gloss over. It's like as they're setting down to dinner, like some weird stuff starts happening. Like one of the men, the husband of the couple who owns the house, like drinks some wine that they've poured for him, and he tastes blood, but nobody else can taste blood. And then they all like the power goes out and the phone line gets cut, and they can't explain that, but they're trying to still enjoy their dinner in candlelight. They all take a bite of the food, and they become like violently ill all of a sudden, or it's
Too
painful for them to
spicy.
eat the food.
Yeah, there's flavor it, and the British palates couldn't handle that. Is what happens there? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
But and so they're as they're walking around trying to figure out what's going on, like they notice like the dark void outside, and that they can't leave the house. They try to break the windows, and the glass won't shatter. And the wife who lives there, who has sort of been behaving strangely throughout the night, is she's possessed basically by the spirit of this young woman who lived in this cottage 200 years ago, and who starved to death there with her two young children, after her husband was hanged for like poaching, basically for trying to find food for his family,
Yeah.
for trying to hunt game. um and all of the story, the ghost story, is delivered in the form of probably a 10-minute monologue. Like, it's really
Yeah.
really long.
Yeah.
And it's mostly like there are a couple of cutaways, but it's mostly like one continuous take, like two or three continuous takes.
Yeah, kudos to the actress Anna Cropper, who just, yeah,
Yeah.
gives it in full, and keeps it, like, and for me personally, like the first time she delivers it, like I hardly blinked, like I was just enraptured by that story that she
Yeah.
tells.
I
It's just
mean,
it's so
it's
deeply personal, and
extremely,
it's
yeah, it's an extremely impressive monologue, not just because of its length, but because of how like emotional it is. Like,
yeah,
she's like this woman like channeling the restless spirit of like another woman who, had to watch her children starve to death
starts to death.
alongside her. Like, yeah, and it's just like and the whole thing is like, she's talking about having to like taking her children basically to watch their father be hanged, so like he would have some loving faces in the audience as he died. And like how they, she had heard from someone that it takes 20 minutes for like a man to die by hanging, which seems insane. I don't think that's true, but how they stood there for 30 minutes like just to give him extra time. And then like how when they were on their way home or something, they like looked in like the window of like the mayor of the town or something, or whatever, and see them having a party with all of this food on the table, and like desserts and treats and stuff, and they're all dancing and shit. And basically just like, how is it fair, how is it just that there's this kind of excess happening in the same village where people are like literally starving to death? And like the horror and the injustice of that, and like all of that emotion, all of that pain is like channeled in this monologue. It's extremely, it's way more sauce than I thought something like this could have, or does have, for most of its runtime, I will say.
It really almost does come out of left field, because so often these types of stories are set up with a big spooky ghoul, that pops out of a closet or besets our protagonist for the last 5 to 10 minutes, and instead we're just beset by capitalism,
Yeah.
or like beset by the bourgeois, really. And like it to me, like, way more like personally unsettling than like a spooky ghoul in a closet. Like, and I want to note too that for as simple as this is, in terms of a production, I think by standards of the time, like I was pretty impressed by what they get away with, in terms of subject matter. Like in the 70s, whether it's like from an American perspective of the time, like good luck getting like a socialist message in anything in the 70s. That's insane. And two, that there was a sequence a little bit before that where Anna, or her character's Rachel in this, is she goes up the stairs into the bedroom to just kind of get away from things for a little bit and lie down, and she sees a dead child on the bed. Like, and she comes to the rest of the group and they're like, "Yo, what'd you see? What's up?" And she's just like, I saw a dead child." And it's like, getting away with that in the 70s is wild to me. On like live television. or at least on like
Yeah,
broadcast television. But
I mean, at
I don't
least in
know.
the UK, this was before a lot of the real strict censorship and like the video
Yeah.
nasties list that sort of accompanied the US satanic panic.
Yeah, and there was a decently surprising amount of confrontational TV work from Britain in the '70s. You had people like Alan Clark working and
Yeah.
Peter Watkins and all these very leftist, very, confrontational filmmakers making stuff. It was kind of the Wild West in a way, which makes sense with this, you know? I think it's really important to, talk about the setup, before we get to the monologue a little bit in terms of, like, the ideas of perception and how perceptions can be altered. You know, I
Mhm.
love the sequence where, uh one of the guys blindfolds his wife and takes an ice cube and, through his speech, he acts like it's a razor blade and he's going to cut her cheek. So, you know, once he flashes the ice cube on her, she freaks out because obviously with the way it's talked about and kind of her limited perception, that's what she sees. And, you know, I think they do an excellent job setting that up with, you know, the wine blood thing or the spicy, you know, food or even seeing the kid. But I think it really plays into the impact the monologue has in a big way to me is like the whole premise of the ghost was trying to alter their perception because, you know, they are stuck in their bourgeois sensibilities and, you know, the ghost needed to shatter that, right?
Right.
Yeah, making the wine taste like blood. When they try to eat the food, they essentially feel like the pain of starvation. They feel like they get sharp stabbing pains in their bellies. Yeah, and I do think that like there is still sort of like an effective like quote unquote horror payoff at the very end, like after the monologue when they come out of it and they kind of all go up into the attic and they see the the corpses of like the woman and her children there. And I think that like that scene was lit kind of stylishly. There was a nice little
Mhm.
visual flourish there, like kind of darker. I think to sort of like hide some of the effects, but like overall, like I was pleasantly surprised like how good those like corpse dummies looked. Like not like overly graphic or anything. Like they weren't like rotted or anything, but I mean they were kind of they
To
looked like
me,
people would starve to death. Like there's a sadness to it.
the uncanny nature of them kind of fucked me up a little bit. Like, if I'm being honest, I think that like nasty wet ghouls or scars or any kind of like crazy gore texture is almost like is almost less scary than them almost just looking like dried puppet husks. Just like it's just the starvation has killed them and they've just kind of dried up,
Yeah.
and like dried up people like that do kind of look like puppets. Ugh, man, I don't. Yeah, like to me, like that shot of like when it pans up to her face and like yeah, you know that like her eyes like aren't real, but they're dried up in the way that they would. Ugh, man, yeah,
Yeah.
it really, and also just like that horrifying visage of fear too, and that we're not being haunted by like necessarily like just vengeance and a sense of anger, but we're being haunted by someone's like just insane trauma, like just total and utter like terror that has just soaked the earth.
Well, yeah, one of my favorite things is that the start of the monologue is basically like where the ghost like identifies herself or whatever, and like she says like it's her dying soliloquy. Like she's talking about how she has to speak it aloud even though there's nobody there to hear it, because in the hopes that like that like the house will hear it, basically, that the house will record it, essentially. A little preview moving into the stone tape after this. Very similar conceptually, but yeah, I mean, essentially, like, she's placing, like, with her dying breaths, is placing a curse upon the house, kind of. And that's what these people are experiencing more so than a haunting, really. They're feeling that echo of the trauma that was there before, the guilt, like you were talking about, the sort of generational guilt. Like, that is definitely like a big theme in both of these. Like, you can
It's
see how it was in the national consciousness.
to give away the horror, or at least thematically, of the stone tapes as well. I think the common conceit between both of these is this: the horror of a haunted house is that we're haunting it, right? Like, the scariest aspect is that we're really the things that are haunting a house, not the ghosts that came before. And that I think works for both of these, and for many haunted house stories in general. Like, often the ghost isn't necessarily the problem, but the current inhabitant. It's the guilt of parading your wealth, right? Like, it's the guilt of that translated suffering of others.
Well, again, going back to the stage element of it, I think what really heightens it and makes it so much more direct with what it's trying to say with that is its use of close-ups, right? Like, whereas if this was on the stage, you could easily look away or have your focus distracted somewhere else. Like, all of the close-ups of this film demand you to keep this as your primary focus and really kind of dig into the performance and the suffering and pain going on, especially in that monologue. I think, the cinematic form really, helps kind of elevate the material a little bit with that.
In the same way that talking to a person does.
Viewer beware, you have to look very closely at some British faces in this one. Ooh,
Heaven forbid.
chilling.
No.
Well, I mean, since it segues so well into the stone tape, do y'all want to go ahead and rate this one and move into the stone tape?
Yeah, I think it's going to be pretty obvious for me. No expectations, but for me, it is a 5. It hits all the right points. It really did kind of scare me a little bit, and I really love just how socialism is used as the moral aspect of that, and I wish more films did.
Ben?
Yeah, I want to mention aesthetically too with both of these. Like, they're shot with 70s tube cameras, and I absolutely love the look of that. Like, the last movie I've seen that used it was like Computer Chess, almost like 10 years ago
Oh
now.
yeah.
But like the way that the cameras like capture light trails and stuff like that really add to kind of the haunted feel of this in a really cool way.
You get all those
Um,
little like chromatic aberrations of like just
mhm.
kind of blue lights that spring up from the corners and little defective blooms that occur. Like, it
Yeah,
looks so sick.
I'm obsessed with these cameras, man. Like, it's
Yeah,
such
dude.
a standard for this era, but it's so singularly kind of unique and aesthetic.
Mhm.
Yeah, I really dug this. I think it was short and sweet. It's kind of theatrical, but still, again, like, I think the form elevates it a little bit. I was at a 3.5, but I'm gonna go up to a 4. I did like this one.
Yeah, I agree with you about the aesthetic of the cameras. I really like that quality. I haven't harped on it too much, but I will sort of, as a segue into my rating, say that aside from the quality of the camera that I like, I hated the way that this short was lit. It drove me insane.
Really?
I could
Yeah.
I could light a scene better than this, and I say that because I have. But other than that, writing's really strong. The performance, especially that monologue at the end, sheesh, really impressive. I'm with you, Ben. I was at a 3.5 going into this as well, but I'm also going to bump it up to a 4. So that will give Dead of Night, The Exorcism, an average of 4.3 out of 5, and you can go watch it on YouTube. So if it sounds interesting, do so. And without further ado, let's roll into The Stone Tape. Came out the same year as The Exorcism, 1972. This one is written by Nigel Neal. I don't know anything about Nigel Neal, but Clavin, you talk about it like that means something, so I don't know if you want to.
I just said he wrote Halloween 3.
Oh,
That's
really?
Oh
it.
yeah, that's right. He also wrote Halloween 3. That's
Right,
right.
yeah.
Season of the Witch. But also, I think he
Yeah,
asked to
that
not have
movie
his name on Halloween 3 by the end of the production because of all the changes they made. So,
Yeah.
Damn.
yeah, he has a series called Quartermaster, I believe, as well. Oh, and also Nigel Neal wrote the anthology, as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, the anthology series Beasts, which also has some fucking bangers, largely around like the cruelty of fellow man, and it's sick.
Gotcha.
And I would recommend that as well.
Well, The Stone Tape, unlike The Exorcism, is feature length. It's 90 minutes.
And it probably shouldn't have been.
And it probably shouldn't be. I will say that. But also it is outside of that, it still feels very akin to The Exorcism, very TV like, very stagey, a little bit grander in scale. Basic premise of this one is an electronics company. One of their divisions moves into this old Victorian mansion to sort of like live and work there in secret, trying to develop the hot new medium for audio recording. Like, magnetic tape is done. We need something better than this. And we gotta beat those fucking wily Japanese to it.
Glad you didn't say the slur, because they sure do a lot in the episode.
There's some wildly out of pocket moments in here.
Yeah, I was gonna say, this movie is mad racist towards the Japanese.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mad racist.
Well, I want to make a note. I want to make a very clear note that the characters in this are mad racist towards the Japanese. But I think
Sure.
that all these characters are very clearly written to be bullish tech guys, like, and frankly, like the sort of the progenitor of tech bros, and that there was
Yeah,
a pretty
kinda.
clear acknowledgement that they were saying those things because it's a lot like when the character in a Barbarian, Justin Long, like says the F slur. I think the delivery is pretty similar, if I'm being honest. And I think the execution is intended
Yeah,
the same.
man. I would not be quite so sure. I think you're projecting a little bit. I won't say the characters are. I don't think they're supposed to be likable, but I do think it's also just. I don't think there's a commentary on that. I think that it is just sort of a drop of the old casual racism that was much more common in not just British stuff, definitely American stuff too, more so in a lot of American stuff, but just the kind of casual racism that you would see in the era. I mean, there's a point where one of the characters like put something in his mouth to make it look like he has buck teeth and like pulls his eyes back.
Yeah, and I'm just saying it's a character who's supposed to come across like, you know, bullish and fratty, like juxtaposed to Jill, like because Jill is like made to be uncomfortable around these guys like the whole time. From the opening sequence, she's put apart from them for that reason.
Jill is like at a 100% fear mode throughout this whole movie. Like, she starts super afraid and just continues being super afraid through the whole thing.
Well, she starts super afraid because she almost gets into a very low velocity accident when she arrives at the mansion. There's like two big trucks on like either side of her car, and they're both like slowly backing up towards each other, like they're gonna like, I don't know. I feel like if they bumped her, they would just be like, "Uh-oh, oops!" Like, but they treat it like they're gonna come in and crush her. And it's so funny, dude. They do this. They do the like the cut to her face. She looks one way, and then we see the truck coming closer. Then she looks the other way, and see the truck coming closer, and just back and forth and back and forth. It's really, really, really funny.
It reminds me of the moment in A Fish Called Wanda where they're driving the big concrete roller and the dude is screaming because he's gonna get run over, but it moves so slowly that like it just durationally like extends this way longer than it reasonably should be. I don't think it was completely intentional how funny that ended up
No,
either.
I don't think it was intentional at all. But no, she is yeah, like the Ryan Industries trucks are both like backing towards her from different angles, and she's honking her horn, and no one around her is really acknowledging those circumstances or doing anything to help. And she's just sort of left in the lurch, and then she backs up her car really quickly and hits a dirt pile. And it, they, of course they did to jump in on the fun. Like they do the same thing that is very common of the era, where like they kind of speed up the shot a little bit of her reversing and cut away before she hits the dirt pile. They get as much of it as they can really use, and that's about it. But clearly they didn't have the budget to like actually damage the car, so they had to be very careful about that shot. But anyway, she backs in, and she's essentially having a panic attack. And I like that, like it's the two trucks that are like big moving trucks for the company. They have all their equipment and everything inside of them. It's the big Ryan Industries. She's clearly made this new change in her life, and as we learn later on, she's very upset about it. Or she has concerns about it and anxieties. And so it's like literally this like big moment in her life is like squeezing her in and crushing her. I also like too how it is juxtaposed to the next events, where she's going through this horror scenario, which to her is like was really intense and scary, of like she was almost crushed by these two trucks. And it was very, again, for us, very drawn out to the point of being funny. And then we immediately cut to like in the same area, like in that same parking lot. We transition to the perspective of all of the business dudes, and they're japing around, they're being boys, and like they pull up one of the cars, or they pull out their guy, and they're like, oh, where's the mascot? And they have a guy dressed in an alien outfit, and he's goofing around, and they're throwing shit all over the place, and they're just being like, they're being tech bros, basically. And I did find like that transition to be like kind of delightfully jarring between like her just like having a panic attack in the parking lot, and then like cutting to like all of the dudes just being dudes. And she goes to her boss, and her boss is like, hey, are you okay? Like she looks a little perturbed. And she says, well, I had almost had an accident. And he without missing a beat, like blames it on like her just being a woman and doing other woman stuff. He's just like, oh, this is just because you're upset with me about like, this move and all this other stuff. Would you give it a rest? And she's just like, I was almost in an accident. I'm just scared. And like he just like and he does this throughout the Stone tapes, where like she has these concerns, and he's always just shutting them down like for being woman stuff. And like he always reads it as her very legitimate like concerns and fears and trauma as being selfish. Like he always reads it selfishly as like something that's like a problem for him to deal with. I really liked all of that stuff. Like it really I don't know, I find this to be kind of relatable, like in some of the projects I've worked on in my past. So like
yeah, I mean, basically their entire dynamic throughout is, you dumb broad, come suck my dick or go away. Like it's it
yeah.
is
I like
I mean
they give it a little bit of roundness, where like he does clearly appreciate her abilities, but that's about it. Like he appreciates her for like being a worker, and he really has like Peter is that character, and like Peter has very little like regard for people as people, but more so as resources as well. That's another sort of aspect of his character that I really like, that I like.
yeah, well, she's the one who programs their computer. So she's like a very vital part of like the job they're doing here, but you can tell that her boss, the Peter character, kind of resents that he has to rely on her so much, because he obviously does just like think that she's just some dumb bitch, but like, yeah, at one point when she's sort of freaking out, he basically says to her like, look, I wish I didn't have to deal with you being a woman and all, but I really need you for your big smart brain. I really just need some brain, bitch,
He's the
like,
worst person.
Yeah.
I find like Peter to be sort of delightfully evil. throughout. Like he's just like such a great depiction of like one of these like businessmen doing business and I'm taking charge, and like
The
constantly like pushing everyone around him to like well beyond their limit, and like taking what could be like a completely reasonable work environment and just making it an utter nightmare for everyone involved. And again, like I think so much of the horror in this has little to do with the ghosts and the spooks and the screams, and has everything to do with how much of an asshole Peter is. Like,
Again, it's the horror of capitalism. It's the horror of how much your job fucking sucks and how
yeah,
much you hate your stupid fucking boss. I it honestly what and granted, like my knowledge of like British television does not go super deep. So this is
a lot of it.
maybe an instance of this may be an instance of guy who's only seen the Boss Baby. So wow, I'm getting a lot of Boss Baby vibes from this. But the Peter
Preface.
character reminds me a lot of the kind of character that they're like the Chris Morrison and Matt Berry characters in the IT crowd
Oh
are
yeah, no,
kind of
absolutely. Yeah, no,
parodying.
definite Boss Baby vibes. I agree. I totally see what you
Yeah,
mean. Like,
it's like I know the IT crowd is canceled or whatever because Graham Linehan sucks, but like
art and
those
artist. The
characters
show's
are
great.
those characters are always going to be some of my favorites, and just like that kind of like swaggering like cocksure boss that just like totally ignores very legitimate concerns of their underlings is fun. But I think like the character's more layered than that too, because he almost has like a kind of like he sort of develops like a your typical like mad scientist, like Frankenstein, Captain Ahab kind of quality to
He
him.
is pathetic.
'Cause
Yeah,
yeah, well,
which
because
rounds him out.
to get sort of into like the meat of the thing is they find in this old mansion there is a room that is made of it's all made of stone, and it clearly belonged to a structure that was here before this mansion that is much older. Um, kind of just like the square stone room with like a staircase that sort of goes up into nowhere. Like there might have used to been a room up there somewhere. But none of the workmen have wanted to like clean that room up. Like there's bad feelings about it. And basically as soon as they get in, like Jill sees a ghost. And they sort of determine that something about the stone in this room or whatever has captured a recording of this woman's death from like a couple hundred years ago or something, and that it's sort of like repeating itself like a tape. And considering like what they're there to do to find like this new medium or whatever, like Peter's like, okay, this is it, like this is the thing, like we have discovered something, like we've discovered a stone tape, hence the name of the film. And the rest of the thing is like sort of like his descent into madness or whatever, like trying to figure this thing out, um, for like financial purposes, while Jill is she becomes equally obsessed with it, but because she wants to find out like what happened to this woman, and like because she feels empathetic, she feels a sense of
Mhm.
empathy towards this woman, and she thinks that it's not just a recording, that her spirit might be trapped here essentially.
Yeah.
Well, and Jill feels that connection the most strongly, the quickest in the room,
Right.
with her, seeing the ghost, very literally one of the first times she was in the room.
They talk about this a number of times throughout, how like sensitivity is very important in that, and like they brush it off at first as, and it's why like I really like how the setup operates in the stone tape we were talking about earlier, but that like sensitivity and like acting as a tape yourself, right, like and being open to like those sort of empathetic like aspects around you influences, like how you receive this ghost. And so Jill, being our most like empathetic person in the room, like sees the ghost in full all of the time. Like whenever she experiences like the ghost, she sees the woman at the top of of the stairs that lead nowhere, right? Like whereas everyone else might just hear the voice. And like the one of the I think it's Roy at some point, who's sort of the second in command character, who is a little bit more understanding, but really just enough to placate Peter's means. Which I love, which also exists in like so many corporate structures, right? Like usually that second in command person like operates to like butter things over and like make everyone feel better while the terrible stuff is still being carried out, right? And it ends up sort of really carrying, like he's a good person, but ends up sort of like perpetuating the same dark means. So like on first watch, I didn't really think much about Roy, but I really liked him on second viewing. But anyway, Roy mentions to Jill, like, you're kind of like a medium. And they joke about it, but she really is.
Yeah.
And that's what I like too, is like
Yeah.
the sense of humor the characters have about their environment. Everyone there is very self-aware. No one is really like the type of person who just full on believes in ghosts. If anything, all these characters start out as like intellectual skeptics, because they work in technology and they don't really care for those sorts of things, but they're forced to experience it. And by like, you know, interviewing and speaking with the people around him who do very much believe in these things, you know, we're sort of brought into that world. Which I think is really cool. I really like when like that sort of skepticism is played up with better writing than something like to dunk on our last episode than on Ghost Stories, that film we watched, which also speaks a lot about skepticism, but I think the key difference here is this rewards that much better.
Yeah,
The same
well, I
themes.
also think that like what I like about the Stone Tape is that there's all those varying degrees, right? Like
Right.
Jill and Roy, I think are the only ones who ever really believe that this is like a ghost, right? Like even Peter and a lot of the other members of the research team, even if they're kind of spooked by it, just by the nature of the thing, they very much treat it as like a scientific phenomenon, right? Like this isn't a haunting. This is something that has been captured in the stone of this place and that's just being repeated on a loop. And what I think is cool is like depending on what your definition of a haunting is like isn't that what a ghost is, right? You know, just sort of like like a repetition, like something caught in time, whatever. But so I like the degrees of that.
Yeah, well,
And
they've
there's even
essentially like those characters have sterilized it, right? Like
yeah.
they've removed all of the empathy from the ghost, and now they're only
And
seeing
I
it
think
as this, you know, like again, like you said, like this sort of event. They've reduced it to code. They've made it binary. They just see it as like a rock or a mineral when it's
right.
not. It's the
Well,
soul. Like it's the
well,
only the ghost only says, or the really only two words or three words like throughout this whole thing, like repeated back on the computer to them when the code gets all funky, and it's like prayer and soul. Like the ghost itself is even trying to tell them like this shit is real. It's not just like, you know, like magnetic tape recording this, you know.
yeah,
Like there's
well,
a
and I think
spirit
for
inside
some
of
of
it.
the characters, I think for some of the characters, it's a defense mechanism as well. Like
Yeah.
to reduce it
Mhm.
to a scientific phenomenon is easier for your brain to handle than accepting the possibility that it's something more than that, right?
Right.
Um,
And we
and
see it in Peter's
there's
life outside of that as well, right? Like Peter, one of the first sort of like little reveals is that after Jill has had to experience all of this awful shit at the workplace, she goes home with Peter. Like, and we
right,
see that she was at some point like, or we assume that at some point he was like working, or she was working for him, and he made a move on her, and as her boss, like, you know, things carried on as they would, especially in the 70s. And that Peter has a family with a wife and kids, and he makes a phone call to them at one point even. And so like
yeah,
she is also could have probably suffering from some guilt of being like a home wrecker and all the rest, that Peter is also, as you can see, like, and just outright like lords over her several times and like pushes that guilt that very much should be his own onto her, in like really gross ways.
it's obviously a pattern of behavior for him too,
Yeah.
because as she sort of starts to get distant from him later, like, and he essentially like discards her and then like starts sleeping with like his secretary or whatever. Like it just another sort of indication of like how he like views the women who work under him,
I really like how that's set up too. It's much, it's much closer towards the end. But at first, there's just a scene with the secretary in the background, and he's just kind of rude to her and says like, get me a fucking coffee or something, because he's just had an argument with this other guy, and she clocks it, and from there we see her realize what's going on, but we as the viewer don't have any confirmation on that, and it's not until Roy comes back much later and Peter's in his bathrobe, and then she comes out from around the corner, that like that's confirmed. And it's once again just showing like Jill's empathy, and like Jill knows. But what I love about that too is that Jill sees it, she clocks it, and like she's bummed out about it, but you can tell she's not at all surprised. And I think that's cool. Like that's very, I think, very true to that sort of circumstance where she's like, like it barely like gives her much thought, like other than just like disappointment in the moment. Like, and she just goes back to her work, because she, at the end of the day, has many of the same problems as Peter. She is equally like obsessed with her work and with finding the results of this, and it's both of their downfalls. Like that they can't walk away from this. They have to keep gazing into that void until it kills them. And yeah, I don't know. I think that's cool.
I was really gonna say, I like the way that early technology is used to kind of try to capture what is going on. This was 72, so it's kind of pre-computers as we know them.
It's
And,
pre Ghost Hunter stuff too.
Mhm.
And it's all very much in the vein of that. I think it's cool because it's operating like on sort of Lovecraftian principles, right? Like Lovecraft was often very focused on like eminent like technology, and like the like with Reanimator, the short story, and like those sorts of pieces, and how like that can kind of facilitate the coming darkness. But it has the texture of like fucking Ghost Hunters, right? With all the dudes with all their equipment fucking bumbling around, shining like their equipment on things.
And
Okay.
Lovecraft, the fear of Asians and the Far East.
That's true. That's true. They
Very
both
true,
have that.
yeah.
That is
Um,
true.
but yeah, like between like the little beeper that shows when the temperature changes rapidly, very simple machine, or like the vuvuzela that they bring out to like blast the stairs with like
Sonic
inverted
emitter,
bow
yeah.
with just
the
drones.
gigantic shoulder mounted megaphone vuvuzela thing. I love that shit, dude.
Yeah, it
That's
was
Just
awesome.
awesome.
walking around just like blasting the room.
It's like literally like you mentioned it earlier, but it was like literally like Ahab with a harpoon like staggering around is like the sort
Yeah.
of the same sense you
Yeah.
have, is like everyone else is like so fucking tired of their boss, and their boss just has this like giant like amplifier thing blasting annoying noise at them walking around this room. It's so funny. Like
Well, yeah, it's obviously super loud and unpleasant, and they're forced to be in there like all night doing this shit.
yeah, just like on the whims of their dingbat boss. Like it's so
Yeah.
sick. Like,
Well, I think while we're talking about, because we've mentioned Lovecraft, right? And I do think that
Right.
there's some, definitely some Lovecraftian stuff here, but I think it goes back even farther than Lovecraft, because like while I would consider the Exorcism, very Dickensian, I think that this story has a lot more shades of like some of the like older British horror writers that like inspired Lovecraft, like your M.R. James, your
Mhm.
Algernon Blackwood, your Arthur
Yeah.
Machen, like these ideas of like these sort of typical like Victorian hauntings that there is maybe like a deeper sort of element to it, like something more cosmic or more pagan or whatever, like this idea of like these more modern homes being built on these like older pagan sites or whatever. Like this room, this stone room, whatever this used to be, like before this big Victorian mansion was built on top of it. And you know, like, so part of the whole mystery is they're trying to figure out what happened here, and they find some old records of like an exorcism in like the early 1900s, but then find more information of like an older exorcism back in like the 1700s or something like that. And like one of the big sort of turning points in the movie is that is sort of in his Ahab moment, Peter like does something that they believe sort of wipes the tape. You know, while he's blasting it with sound or whatever, like it releases or clears or erases or whatever the spirit of this maid, this Victorian maid who fell off the stairs and died or whatever. And they think that, okay, that's sort of it. But really where the movie ends up is like by erasing that recording, it has revealed something older and much more inexplicable underneath, that kind of like the cosmic horror, you know. Really reminds me of like Arthur Machen, like great godpan stuff.
Yeah, like in terms of the character themes that we've been speaking to, it works really well for that. Like once again, Peter is just sort of discarded another woman. He's just scared off this ghost.
Yeah.
And he's just like wiped it away. Like, and you know, again, every character at that point, like once they realize like, oh, the screams have stopped, this room is like no longer, you know, like being beset by this maid. Clearly we're done here. I guess we're gonna have to hand our facility over to the guy who's been testing out dye-coated laundry machines or whatever. We're gonna have to give up on this experiment. It was a watch, and they all walk away from it except for Jill, who can't help herself. She knows that there's more. And I like that because once again, Jill so often has been discarded and, you know, not considered. So now that she sees this happening with these same circumstances, she has to follow through on it. Which again, great to me, fantastic characterization. Like works so well. And then on the Lovecraftian side, this is all of my favorite stuff with the Stone Tape. Like the conceptual elements, particularly with the setup to the payoff. So I want to touch on the cool aspects of the room really quickly. There's the small stuff. You know, it's a building that was for a brief period during the Great War. Like the Americans used it for their army forces or whatever. And this one room was a storage room that wasn't touched. And before that, it's always been sort of a room that hasn't really been messed with all too much since it was constructed. And so they find some tins in there and like an old Christmas letter or a letter to Santa that's incredibly ominous. But in addition, it's all stone except for the back paneling or the side paneling in the room. It's sort of been like boarded up with wood that's all been rotted out. They pull the boards away, and just along the wall there are stairs that only go up about 5 or 6 feet. They don't go up very high, and they don't go anywhere. I love this. I think this is really cool texture. It's the sort of stuff you see in all of the good SCPs, which also makes a lot of sense because I heard this secondhand. I was trying to find more information on it, but a lot of this actually did go in influence like several. I mean, there's like everything's been turned into an SCP at this point, but and it also influenced the writing of Control, the game as well, which I think is pretty clear. Like when you kind of compare the aesthetics of the two, but anywho, like this is the kind of like storytelling that I love, is this idea of like these stairs that go to nowhere. Like it's the banality of them that makes them like so spooky to me. Like they don't really make any sense in the architecture of the space. So what are they doing there? What does it mean? And much of my first viewing of the Stone Tapes, I was just trying to fucking grok it, right? I was just trying to figure out like what is the purpose of these like steps, like in that space, like was there just another floor up there, because it wouldn't have been that low, so why are they, you know, in that positioning and the rest. And it never fully explains that either, which is perfect. Like and so it kind of leaves me sort of trapped wondering, you know, is that part of like the cyclopean architecture of the space that was there before, you know, in like the previous exorcism of the past? We don't know. And I think that's particularly neat. And for it to then later be informed by Jill's great realization that this space has chronicled or captured or held or is an outlet for hauntings much older than 100 years, right? Hauntings that go back, to some kind of pre-archaic time. Like we don't understand like what resonance of the earth is carried in this building. And yeah, I think that's all sort of informed by it.
I love how it's almost foreshadowed, with, the inciting incident really being them going into the room and realizing that there's these stairs that are boarded up in, behind decaying wood panels. And that really kind of sets off the whole thing, but that at the same time, like, that kind of plays into the idea of this as, more history than meets the eye. Um, and yeah,
Yeah.
I think that kind of spanning is really interesting, especially with the stories that are revealed of the place over the period of the movie.
Well, yeah, because they talk about it's like, well, the initial ghost, like the maid or whatever, like that she fell off the stairs and died, but they're like, these stairs are like 5, 6 feet off the ground. Like it's not really high enough that like you'd expect to die from falling from that. So that's kind of like the mystery behind it as well. And like what we really learned by the end is that like the maid who was in there was effectively, like Jill and sensitive to whatever happened in this room and was able to become enraptured by whatever force controls that or is left behind or whatever. And it's like that's the really cool like Lovecraftian stuff too, right?
Yeah.
Is like when at the end like Jill gets sucked into that and like he's running from something, but we don't really know what it is because like we don't really see it. But she's like terrified. She's like crawling up the stairs, and then all of a sudden there is a door at the top of the stairs.
And then all of a sudden, beyond the door is a starry summit. I
It like
love that shot. Like it's very clear that they like green screened it in with like the technology of the time, but like even still, like the to me,
effects wise, it's quaint.
it's quaint, but like okay, and this is gonna I know this is gonna come off pretentious. I don't really care. It's how I feel. The artifice of it makes it once again spookier. Like we were talking about earlier with like the starved mother and her like decaying children. Like the puppet, the fact that she looks like a puppet, almost to me makes it spookier. And like I feel the same here is like as she like ascends the stairs and like she looks out at like this starry realm that we just barely get a glimpse of. The fact that it is sort of like displaced and wrong looking and the perspective is off like unsettles me more than seeing it like done in full, like with grandeur with $1 million CG effects. Like I really like it.
It reminds me of the end of Shiraishi's Occult.
Yes.
We've talked about the
Yeah.
podcast.
That's fair. That's fair. And
Uh,
like I love those things for the same reason too, right? Like it's artists trying to tell like the best story they can with the means that they have, and like it is all for the love of the game, right? Like, and because of that we get to share in the innovation of it, right? We get to share in the conceptual nature of the thing. We get to kind of like further share that story and stew on it ourselves and conceptualize on those ideas, as opposed to like a large budget spectacle that fully realizes the thing, right? Like to me, like this is culture, this is conversation. And I love that. I love that about things like this, where like to me the strings kind of add some love. And yeah, I don't know. It's cool, man. I love the movies.
I always appreciate these kind of swings. And like things like this, even when the effects aren't like cutting edge or anything, they look kind of cheap and hokey.
Yes, they do.
I appreciate that kind of thing far more than I appreciate like the general aesthetic of these things. Sort of like I talked about with the Exorcism. I think this one is less egregious and like the lighting problems I think the Exorcism had, but it's still like it looks like television.
Yeah.
Like there's no like interesting like depth of field. It's all very flatly lit. It's all very like, you know, flatly framed and blocked and so on and so forth. Like it has very little like visual style outside of like the set design. That is a thing. Like I do like the set design here, but yeah, like this like little bit where it gets like abstract and like cosmic at the end is cool. Like even if the effects are kind of hokey, I appreciate it, and I like that they do keep it weird and that they don't like try to define it. Like it feels much spookier because of that. It does feel that much more like inexplicable.
And it's only in those last moments. If anything, I think that there could have been like for all that we're wanting more with this, which I am too, like for the record, like for all that we're wanting more with this, I almost wish that sequence where Jill is beset by it at the end was a little bit shorter and had a little bit less. To me in particular, like the hokiest elements of it to me are like I described like the cool bit where she comes out at the top and like she's sort of like ascending an astral mountain all of a sudden, like
Yeah.
like that's sick. But like particularly the bit we haven't touched on is like the overlay effects with like the kind of green warping faces and orange dots that are recurring, and like those like obviously don't track with the camera and they are just sort of placed on the scene. And like again, it's what they had at the time. We've all like I think we've all seen like the BBC Narnia series that does like where they just kind of draw on the film as well. But like that could have been like less. I really like how then later how Peter, when he enters the room and he's visited by the same thing, they just put a fucking green gel on him and they leave it at that. It's almost better for it. Like it's cool.
I appreciate that they go that far with the sequence with Jill and then keep it subtle with Peter. If they kept it subtle for both, I think I would have found it a little bit wanting.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm kind of convinced.
I think if there's anything that I would sort of cut down in that sequence with Jill is at the very end of it where she like she sort of like
I love
falls
that.
into that was a
Because
little bit
she's like she's intentionally like wrong in the space, right? Like she's like the stairs. She's become like the stairs. Like it doesn't make sense that she'd be falling like that, you know? Like I don't know. Like it is hokey. It does look goofy, and you're not wrong, but also I like
it's
it.
goofy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, I feel like where the Exorcism kind of has, especially heightened theatricality, this has very heightened TV production to
Yes.
me, especially with
Oh, no, yeah.
optical effects and stuff like that. And, it is like a mixed bag, like you were talking about. Like, for every moment it does work, there's another where it feels just incredibly dated.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
just especially the optical effects of seeing the ghost, the first couple times. It's just like that is
takes you out of it a little bit. And I will say this is a minor gripe, but the scene where they go to like the bar or whatever after like to talk over, I fucking hated that set. I hated the way it was lit. It did not look like a real restaurant or a bar. It was so fucking weird to me. I don't know. And it just like it was all washed out and weird looking. Like that shit
When you
drove
go to
me
the pub.
fucking crazy.
Yeah, I was too caught up with like what I really liked about that scene, because you're right, you're absolutely right, is I was too distracted by like when they talked to the one bar lady who's like I don't know in like her 60s, and she was like, oh, she said something so funny.
She said she was a good time girl for
Good
the
time
American
girl.
soldiers.
Yeah, when all the Americans were in town, and she basically just like lets on like that she
Yeah.
was just getting railed by American sailors, and that's so funny to me, dude.
Yeah.
Like
It is a little bit frustrating because it's like it feels like they ran out of budget to like really dress that set the way they needed to for like
well, it was almost certainly a set
whatever.
from some other thing, right? Like
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be like a village pub, and it does not look like one at all. And it's the kind of thing where it's like, I understand this is like a BBC production, so they're shooting it all in studio, basically, like except for the exterior stuff outside the castle. But it's like, just go shoot on location in any one of 80,000 fucking quaint British pubs. Like, how over there, like, how hard can it be to
For a
find
rock.
one? Like, just
Yeah,
go in there
it'll
and,
hit.
yeah, just throw a rock and the rock will land in some red-faced drunk fat fuck's pint, and he'll fucking yell at you and
Hey.
fucking like try to start a fight. Like, I mean, I don't know. Like I said, it's a really minor gripe.
No, but it's a
Just
funny
bugged
one.
me.
Like, I'm glad you brought it up. Like, oh fuck, I had something else. I really like the B plot of their big threat of losing their space is there's also like a goofy washing machine tech guy who's trying to make a washing machine that can sense all the dyes and colors and knows how to wash the clothes. And his hands are always like covered in dye when he shows up on, in a
Very
scene.
silly, yeah.
I know that's good
And
characterization. That's great texture.
he always seems extremely drunk, and
Yeah.
I'm uncertain if that's intentional or not, and frankly that elevates it for me. Whether
Yeah.
I can't quite tell if he's supposed to be drunk or if that's just how the actor was doing it. Very good.
Very good. Either way, if he's drunk or if he's faking it well, great acting.
I like to believe that he was actually drunk on set.
It's
Like
really more fun.
that's the one I want to choose to believe. Is that, like, I mean, because yeah, it's fucking television, whatever. Like, he just showed up fucking shithouse.
And to kind of wrap that up with, like, that idea of like, oh, it's television, it's cheap, we're doing this on the fly, it's the best we have, it's the BBC, right? What I really love about that is, like, we've all, I think, kind of agreed, like, conceptually banger, great idea, that these buildings can record ghosts. Sick. These ideas are so cool. What I'm really happy about is, as you guys know, I'm a huge sucker. I think we all are here, of going back to the source on stuff. As an art director, it's very important for me to not just understand like the material of the time, but to understand like the material of times past. And what we came from, and the stories that were told before, and how they've evolved over time. We were talking about the influence of Lovecraft on this, and the rest. And I think it's really cool that for both of these stories, we have great analogs for stories that have taken these same great concepts and executed them with the materials of the time, right? Like, I think it's a really special thing that Skinamarink was able to adapt a lot of those same concepts of the exorcism and see some of those ideas realized of, what it looks like to be in a house that is spirited away, right? That the game Control was able to do such an amazing job of showing like cyclopean architecture and how it is like psychically influenced the minds of those that are living inside of it. I just think that's a special thing, man. Because again, like, especially like for the time and for the circumstance around them, I think it's so cool that these things were made at all. And that frankly, we got the privilege, because the BBC was constantly taping over their own shit, to get to see them is a special thing to me. So I'm really glad y'all liked them,
Yeah.
and I got to share them with y'all, and hopefully you understand why I picked them.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised that the Stone Tape hasn't been remade, to be honest.
Me too. It'd be so good for it, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's one to me that isn't sacred. Like, I think you could do an incredible remake of the
Yeah.
Stone Tapes.
Mhm.
No, I was gonna say the same thing. Like, this is the kind of thing that's ripe for a remake. Something that is like really cool conceptually, but is kind of left wanting in terms of execution. Like, those make for the best remakes when they're put in the right hands, frankly.
I'll tell you, there is something that conceptually is very similar to the Stone Tape, and also like kind of misses that final aspect of execution. That's Archive 81. Archive 81 is trying to tell a similar story
Yeah.
about how people and things are captured on tape and sort of recorded through the analog of time, and how they have an effect on us in cursed buildings and architecture. Like, I think a lot of those same conceptual components are there. It's just that once again that the payoff is not in full. I think the Stone Tape frankly has like better writing and payoff than Archive 81, but I think that Archive 81 does a better job with the
I
aesthetic.
agree. Are you talking about the show or the podcast?
The show. I still haven't listened to the podcast, but maybe
Okay.
you had considering like again like sort of the abstract nature of storytelling with a podcast, I might enjoy it more. I need to give it a go.
The podcast, the Archive 81 podcast is better. I still have some problems with it. I don't think it's the best acted. Just sort of a problem I have with a lot of these kind of like narrative horror podcasts. That's a whole other thing. I did not like the Netflix show very much personally. Again, like one of those things. Like there's some there's some cool concepts, but sort of bad execution
I
at,
think
at times.
I rewatched the first few episodes of it recently, and I think that the first episode is almost without flaw on its own. Like if you just cut it out of a vacuum, like I think it's great. Um, I think that it's the landing that they really didn't stick.
Yeah, it's funny to compare it to the Stone Tape because much like the Stone Tape, it kind of falls victim to the formal style and tropes
Yeah,
of the time,
no,
right?
that's a
Like
great point.
where Stone Tape is very much 70s TV coded, for better and for worse. Archive 81 is very Netflix streaming show coded, right? Like where it falls victim very much in the same way to kind of artistic limitations, but also kind of the way that system works.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's a great point. Y'all have any other things you kind of want to touch on with the Stone Tape?
I will say the one thing is, again, I really like it conceptually. The one thing I kept thinking throughout is this could have been a tight hour, right? Or a tight 50 minutes, but them extending it out to 90 minutes just felt a little too stretched thin at times. Even though they're
I
playing
agree.
with a lot of cool ideas, it's just kind of you could have cut a little bit of the bands and stuff,
I think yeah, it's one of those tricky things where like I think that 40 minutes is too short for the Stone Tapes, but I think that like the 90 is too long. I do agree.
I think it could have been an hour, honestly.
Yeah, like an even an even 60 would have because it's
Yeah.
just it's like I think the best place where we touched on it was moments like that opening sequence, right? Where like it's played it's so drawn out that it's almost it frankly does become like nearly comedic because it goes on for so long, whereas like if it had just come at like a slightly more like significant clip, it could have maybe had more impact. And there's just several other sequences that I think do just like that are just extended a little bit. And it's mostly interstitial moments. Like I just think like just a tighter edit is all it really calls for. I wouldn't necessarily want like any scenes or like texture or information that is there lost. But I do agree. I do think that like
that pub scene can go. The pub scene can go.
Yeah. Yeah, you know
no,
what?
it was a
You're
good time
totally
girl.
right.
That's funny. Like, come on.
The throwaway gag of the bartender being the good time girl for the American soldiers is like the one kind of interesting thing about that scene. The rest of it is I don't give a shit. Ditch it. Ditch
Oh,
it. I mean, to get it down to an hour, you got to make some cuts, and that one feels like an obvious one to me. Because yeah, I think there's about 60 minutes of like really tight material here, and it just meanders a little bit too much at times and it feels a little bit self-indulgent, like, and also considering like the TV aesthetic. I know these days like it's not super uncommon for like quote unquote prestige television episodes to sometimes be like usually like the first or last episode of a season will be like an hour 20, an hour 30 or whatever. HBO shows love to do that. This cheapo BBC horror special does not need to be that. Like I don't think there's any reason for this episode of television to be 90 minutes long. It just doesn't quite justify it. But I mean, still lots of good to be found here. Absolutely. Well, yeah, I mean, if y'all don't have anything else, Cleve, do you want to get us started on rating for this one?
So I got a lot of personal joy, and very subjective joy out of pondering over this movie. Like we've said, during Lamb and or Hagazusa and like other sorts of films like that. I like having that negative texture and space. It is not necessarily I'm not giving props to the film over that. As we said, I even agree. I think that just sort of just across the board, it would be probably mechanically better to trim down some of the and kind of like bump up the pacing a little bit. But for me
Sure, but if you like it,
personally,
you like it.
I like it, and I do. So I'm I really love like just how it makes me feel, where it takes me. I'm once again I'm gonna give the Stone Tapes a 5. I certainly don't expect the same, but it yeah I really related with Jill as a character. And I thought that it's one of the better depictions of like workplace panic attacks that I've seen.
You identified with Jill because you're a dumb broad with great brain.
Oh, you know it, dude. That's me, baby. So yeah, easy
Ben,
5.
how would you rate the Stone
You
Tape?
know, this is another case where, much like the Exorcism, I think discussing it has been really beneficial.
Oh yeah.
Um, I think again, like we've talked about with Tease and I, especially in terms of preference, like I definitely prefer things a little tighter, and I think the expectation of TV as a medium kind of demands tighter stories almost always. So having that extended here was a little inconsistent for me. Same with some of the effects. You know, for everyone that worked super well, there was one that kind of was rough. But again, the concepts in the story here are very classic, you know, cosmic horror. Yeah, and I like that. So I'm gonna give it a 3.5.
Yeah, I'm gonna once again ditto Ben exactly. This is one where I don't feel like I was talked up on it. I was going into this with 3.5, and 3.5 is where I'm going to leave it. Mostly, for all the reasons that I've hit on already. I think it is a really strong concept, and I like the sort of, especially as a pairing with the Exorcism, I really appreciate having the sort of more like classic Dickensian on one side, and then a very different sort of but equally British classic tradition of things like M.R. James and Algernon Blackwood and Arthur Machen and stuff like that. So different sort of literary styles to very similar themes that reflect some of the anxieties of the era, which I think is what horror is supposed to do. And one of my favorite things about studying horror is sort of like viewing it from the lens of when it was created, and everything that entails. So yeah, the Stone Tape is going to be a 3.5 out of 5 for me. But overall, a really nice pairing, Clava. Like Ben was saying earlier, I'd like uh, to compliment you on how well these two work together. That will give the Stone Tape an average of 4 out of 5. This one's also on YouTube, I believe.
Yep.
So, dear listener, you
Yeah.
can go check that shit out if you want.
Again, I have to say, like, I had heard of neither of these going into this week.
Hey,
So like I came in with zero expectations and was really, yeah, again, impressed with how interesting and unique they are. I'm
Right?
probably
Like
gonna have to watch more British TV specials at some point.
yeah, they're just such a great like I think particularly for people who work in creative industries, I think that they're highly recommended because of like that. We joked about it on Ghostwatch, but again, it's theater of the fucking mind, right? Like it's but this time for good. Like it's that I like it. Yeah, it's that it's conceptual texture, and it provides really good like I think there's just fertile ground here for ideas and storytelling. And it's just again it's cool to see like what came before when folks had way less to work with, and what they were able to achieve with that. And This brings me a lot of fucking joy, man. And like I want to share this with as many people as I can. Like I want to watch The Exorcist again. I want to watch again like there's several more episodes from this that are they're like from oh fuck Dead of Night that are just fucking killer. So if you want more, I do recommend the rest of those episodes. They're of the same level of quality. I just know that I just knew that like the Exorcism in particular, like with some fellow socialists on board, you'd really appreciate like the themes there, and again like the rarely told themes in storytelling, under the wonderful light of capitalism. To see
Ben,
them told.
you're saying that you're gonna watch some more British television. I think the funniest arc for you would be to get into Doctor Who, the original
Oh
series,
God,
Oh,
though.
no.
actually, you know
Like
what?
the
For the
original
same
series, like
reasons.
Ben gets really into like
Oh.
the first through the eighth Doctor, like all of those seasons. That would be very funny.
Hey, man, some of those you can say the same thing about. Like, I'm serious. Like, conceptually, pretty neat. They had a shoestring budget to work with, and they were doing what they can. I think that one of the worst things to happen to British television was the new run of the Doctor Who series. I think that's where like so much of it went wrong. Was like the appeal to like broad American audiences and the soap David Tennant stuff.
Yeah.
I like those David Tennant episodes. I'm very personally. I watched them when I was like around 15, and they hit me just right as an American. But like
Yeah,
I do think that is
I
where
watched a
like
bunch of
a
those
lot
too.
went wrong with the BBC.
I mean, you're kind of right though. Like even a lot of those episodes, like there's stuff that is very cool conceptually, but kind of left wanting with sort of cheapo BBC television execution. Um,
That's kind of the look.
a proud tradition.
The interesting thing of that era is like there were other British TV shows that were using the medium like way more interestingly. Like I don't know if you've ever seen The Signal Man, Cleve, but
Yeah,
it's one of the Christmas ones that they did,
Oh,
in a
cool. I'll have to
series.
check it out. Yeah.
And it's like shot really cinematically,
Hmm.
honestly. Which is so different than like the strict kind of TV
Yeah,
studio
tight
kind of
budget.
look.
Yeah, little sets.
Um yeah, and
I guess
like
depends who's producing.
But
yeah.
one of the things that's cool to me about the Exorcism in particular is that they start that um story by flagging it, right? Like they say, "Oh, do you remember those little games we played when we were children? Those games where you blindfold yourself or you turn all the lights out and you touch grapes and you say, "Oh, this is Johnny's eyes. These are Johnny's eyes, and ooh, the spaghetti is his brains." And they play up those things, which is a universal sort of experience for most children.
Not today. Children be on the iPad all the damn time.
But they remind us of like they take those very simple childish concepts and they remind us why they're scary again, right? And why like sometimes those imaginings are scarier than the thing itself, right? Than the the all the glossy special effects and the rest. It's just it's those
Yeah.
ideas that'll make you like that'll haunt you about it far long after you've seen the thing. And that's cool that they do start the exorcism with that little parable.
Well, next week it's a Patreon pick once again. I rolled a die earlier to determine what the film was going to be. This one comes from our honorary pod boy Zach, and we're going to be talking about a film from acclaimed director James Mangold from 2003 called Identity. I don't know really anything about this film at all.
What
All
what
I
else
know
has
about
James Mangold directed? Didn't he direct the Bob Dylan movie
did
recently?
the most recently, yeah, the Timothy Chalamet Bob Dylan biopic. He did Walk the Line, the Johnny Cash biopic with Joaquin Phoenix. He did a Logan, the Wolverine movie. Yeah,
He
and
also did
he's done a couple
the
other
new
things.
Indiana Jones movie, The Dial of
Yes,
Destiny.
that's right. The Dial
Oh,
of
the game?
Destiny. Yeah. No,
No, no,
the
that's
Dial of
the game
Destiny.
is The Great Circle. Dial of
Oh,
Destiny
I
was that
forgot that
movie
movie
that
even
came out a
existed.
couple
Oh
years
yeah,
ago.
that's right. There was an Indiana Jones recently.
Yeah,
Jesus.
where they CG'd or Harrison Ford to be young again or whatever. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean James Mangold has definitely become sort of a big like Hollywood journeyman filmmaker. Pretty mixed bag for me. I think this one's relatively early in his career. It's from 2003. I don't know anything about it. So I'm curious. Zach tends to come at us with kind of weirdo picks. So it's always interesting. So I'm looking forward to it. So join us next week for our review of James Mangold's Identity from 2003. Until then, if you like the show, you know what to do. Leave us a 5-star rating, a review, share an episode, like, subscribe. That's the best way to help the show grow and get into more people's feeds and all that good bullshit. Join the Patreon if you want to give us a few buckaroonies. Patreon.com/podpeoplepod. Shout out, of course, to our highest Patreon tier, the honorary pod boys, Sam, Zach, Micah, and Mitchell. Y'all are the goats. You can also follow us on Letterboxd, Pod People Podcast, where you'll find a list of all the films we've talked about on the show with our average ratings and links to those reviews. For my recommendation this week, I'm going to keep it topical with obscure television. I have been watching a Dutch show from 1969, a limited series, 13 episodes called Floris. It's kind of a sort of like Ivanhoe style, like Men in Tights, sort of swashbuckling medieval adventure thing. Historical fiction set against like real historical events with real historical characters, but fictionalized. It stars Rutger Hauer, and the entire series is directed by Paul Verhoeven before he did any feature-length films very early in his career. It's kind of quaint and low budget and charming, but the production value is really elevated by the fact that in the Netherlands you just have all of these old castles and towns and stuff that have been basically unchanged for 500 plus years. So they just shoot a bunch of this shit on location, and it like really boosts the production value a lot. But it's super goofy. They have a chimp sidekick named Jeroen for some reason. It's really fun. I recommend it. I will say I can't really recommend like where to find it. It's not on streaming anywhere, but like the real ones, like y'all are resourceful.
I think it did have like a DVD run at some point or something like that.
Okay, you might be able to find.
always...
You might be able to find the DVD. You might be able to find the DVD.
Yeah,
it's very fun. It's been a delight.
Remember, this is a good point. This is a moment to say before you do that. In the realm of lost or hard to access media, piracy is moral. All right, carry on, Ben. What were you gonna say?
Yeah, honestly, I think it might be on archive.org. I wouldn't be surprised. But what's interesting about Floris, I really want to watch it because what I've heard is it's like a predecessor to like Flesh and Blood. Like he took a lot of the characters and the same ideas and iterated later in his career. And Flesh and Blood as a movie is awesome. That movie fucking kicks ass. So
hot mess, but it's
very
great.
much looking forward to catching on.
I guess for my recommendation this week, I'm gonna recommend reading some Algernon Blackwood. I've been reading a ton of his short stories lately, and they've blown me away, honestly. They are way more contemporary feeling than I expected. Like they feel just as relevant today as they were at the time of release. And there's some incredibly cool cosmic horror ideas that he plays with through his stories. And yeah, they're speedy and fast paced. He has a ton of variety with them. I think Penguin put out like some retro cover versions of
nice.
The weird horror and cosmic horror in a series. And if you're gonna pick up one, Algernon Blackwood again. Great writing.
Oh yeah. In this episode, I've recommended already like 6 things, so I'm just gonna quickly rip through those. The video game Control, the Skinamarink, etc. Like, just go and enjoy any of the things I've mentioned this podcast or any of the rest of us have. I'm not gonna take up too much more of your time with that.
Lots of good stuff to recommend. All right, well, next week we're finally leaving the UK. It's been a nice few weeks delving into the spooky British Isles. But next week it's on to something new once again. But thank you as always for joining us. And I don't know, if you die, hopefully